Okay, welcome to my presentation on culturally responsive teaching. In this week's module, we focused on three different articles and talked about how that affects instruction, assessment, and family connections. My name is Dara Shealy. This is for Adams State University for the class The Exceptional Learner. The date is June 26, 2026. So, why is culturally responsive teaching important? Well, for culturally and linguistically diverse students, including English language learning students, they both bring very, very valuable cultural and linguistic assets. And so it's important that we highlight those. These students are learning academic content while also trying to learn an entirely new language. And so they are going to require and deserve some additional scaffolding and supports. And we as teachers should create inclusive classrooms that support the language, the culture, and the overall academic success of all of our students, including the CLD and ELL students. So, the first section we're going to focus on is instruction, specifically the planning and scaffolding of our lesson plans. It is important that we include both content and language objectives when we are planning our lessons so that we can make it clear as to what we want the students to learn and what language and vocabulary we want them to be able to utilize while explaining this content. We need to build background knowledge, and so culturally diverse students and English language learners might have a different set of background knowledge as other students. Every student is coming in with different background, and so it's important that we go back over the essential prerequisite information that's required to understand the more complex concepts that we're eventually going to dive into. I teach science, and so this is especially important, building that background that's required for students to understand what we're going to be talking about. It's also important to connect lessons to students' experiences and cultures. The more we can connect what they're learning about to real world examples and their everyday life, the more engaged that they're going to be, the more interested they're going to be in participating and learning with us. And so we can scaffold this instruction in a few ways. We can use visuals, we can use graphic organizers. That's a huge one that I use a lot in science. I find graphic organizers for our section on geologic time, for example, to be super helpful just in categorizing and keeping track of the different periods that Earth has been through. Just for an example, sentence frames or sentence stems can be very helpful just to get the kids thinking about, what kind of language they can use to answer the prompts. And then realia, anything from their real world, as we talked about, anything that they can connect from their everyday life to the more complicated and challenging concepts that they're going to be covering in class. Still on the thread of instruction, it's important that we help them develop the essential language and focus on their strengths so we can explicitly teach the vocabulary that they're going to need to explain these complicated concepts first. And once we have introduced that vocabulary, we need to provide ample opportunity for them to speak, to listen, to read, and to write using all of that vocabulary. Practice, practice, practice. We can create language-rich classrooms by doing this, by just making sure that we are practicing all the time, reintroducing concepts, making sure that we create an inclusive culture in the classroom where it is okay for students to make mistakes. We can use strength-based instruction, and so we can recognize the cultural diversity, interests, and different perspectives that our students bring to our classrooms as assets and not something that they are lacking. And we can collaborate with our English as a second language teachers and colleagues as well. I have gotten very close with my ESL teacher at my school, and it has made my life a lot easier because then we can collaborate on a specific student's needs. The second part we're going to focus on is assessment. My favorite tool in teaching is formative assessment. We can monitor their learning throughout the instruction through formative assessment. This allows students to see what students might be struggling with, We can go back and revisit those concepts if need be. I find that formative instruction is especially valuable when in collaboration with your PLC, with your professional learning community. Me and my PLC and my earth science PLC, we are constantly collaborating on formative assessment. We'll collect data through the app Formative, analyze that data, and decide together how we can move forward, how we might want to adjust instruction that year or the following year going forward. So formative assessment is a very powerful tool in that. Different forms of formative assessments. We could use warm-ups and exit tickets. These are some of my favorites. Not right now. We can use observations, discussions, and graphic organizers. This helps us identify any misconceptions that might take place early on so that we can, like I said, go back and adjust our instruction. And we can reteach concepts when needed. While still talking about assessment, we can differentiate and utilize feedback. Feedback is huge. And so differentiating in assessments by allowing multiple pathways to demonstrate learning, not just one way. If I'm doing a CER response, for example, a claim evidence reasoning, allowing students to either provide oral feedback with a little bit of support is a common way that I'll use. I'll give them sentence stems when using the CER. I'll also maybe allow an alternative submission in the form of a visual or any other way that you can provide. As long as you're providing multiple ways towards assessment, your students are going to be more successful. This allows you to maintain high academic expectations while also offering the correct supports and differentiations. And then again, using strength-based feedback, so focusing on what they're strong in, not what they're lacking. And we can highlight persistence, problem solving, and a growth mindset for struggling students. Finally, our last part we're going to talk about is family connections. Biggest thing there is just communication. Communicate with your families, with your students' families. Communicate with them in their home languages, if possible. If I ever have I've started to do a newsletter at the end of last semester, and so I would send that out in Spanish. I would have a Spanish version of that available, as all of my ELL students were Spanish. And you can use any tools, any translation tools. There are plenty out there. It's pretty easy for us teachers to do, and it makes a huge difference in the communication for the families of our ELL learners. We can use interpreters or translated materials, like I said. We can learn their preferred communication methods. So that's also huge. If they don't like the newsletters, that's okay. We also have platforms like we use Infinite Campus at my school, and so I can send out message blasts. We also use Schoology or Google Classroom. You can send out message blasts. There, you can create a phone list and send out text messages. You can call them. Whatever is their preferred communication method, make sure that you're using that. Share positive updates regularly, not just when they're misbehaving. Reach out when they're doing a great job. That is also going to make your job easier if down the line they do misbehave. And then just encourage that two-way communication. Make sure that you're taking their feedback into account and make sure that you're focusing on the assets that they provide through their diversity. And then in all of this, you're creating a partnership, right? They're your best asset, so make sure you use them. You can learn about students' strengths and their interests, and you can focus on the family's cultures and experiences and touch on that in the classroom. You can connect what you're learning in the classroom to their cultures and experiences at home. And then recognize families as partners. They know just as, if not more, about the student than you usually, and so their perspective is going to be of utmost value. And through all of this, you're going to build trust through respect and collaboration. So, big takeaways here when we're supporting our CLD students. To bring it all together, we're going to plan for both content and language learning. We're going to scaffold instruction and teach academic vocabulary before jumping into more complex concepts. We're going to use an ongoing formative assessment to adjust instruction when need be. We can differentiate assessment while maintaining high expectations by providing multiple pathways to demonstrate understanding and learning and competence. And then we can build on students' strengths and develop meaningful partnerships with our families. I did end up using one extra just because the three that I had initially chosen didn't really talk about as much of communicating with families. And so I found this great article here about communicating with ELL families. It was a very digestible format. I really enjoyed it, and that helped, especially in the family connection section there. Thank you. This was a great assignment, and I look forward to learning more throughout the course.